you're all there, you're all here. That means we are together at this virtual Candlelight Vigil on July 10th, 2024. We are so grateful to share this space with you and to join together in honoring our losses, honoring our love, honoring our hope, and creating a space to do all this together. If you haven't been to a vigil before, welcome to Reimagine. You're going to meet our incredible guests that you see featured here. And as you see on the screen, candles are a part of the ceremony today. So now would be a great time to just get set up and grab a candle, settle in and relax. My name is Brad Wolf. I am the executive director of Reimagine. We are a nonprofit organization with a mission to do what our name implies, which is to look at things differently, to reframe with a wider lens some of the hardest things that we face as a culture and as individuals: loss, adversity, and mortality. And how do we collectively be with those hard parts of life, to integrate them in healthy ways, and see that when we talk about loss and injustice and pain and loneliness and suffering, there are dualities that can be present for us and that we can actually cultivate in community. So what might it look like when we consider the relationship between loss and love, injustice and equality, growth, community, service, creativity? What are the flip sides of our suffering, of our pain, and how might we cultivate that collectively, not just for this space, but really for the world? Because the question is, how do we respond to the seemingly mounting challenges that we face, the grief that sits on top of our own individual losses, and now we're bearing the weight of what we see collectively within our news cycle, within the wars, the traumas. We all are mourning something here, whether it's small. You know, I just have to say, there's this expression: you can drown in an ocean, and you can drown in 3 feet of water. And so, large or small, we are all grappling with hard things and with loss. And so we want to hold space for all of those rivers and to rise the tides as one here in this space. And we're going to do that through this vigil format. And so just to get you set up today, you are probably very familiar at this point with Zoom. You're all logged on, of course. And so just want to begin by getting this chat going today. If you don't mind sharing where you are calling in from or Zooming in from, and what reason compelled you to join this space this evening. You don't have to share right now who or what you're honoring, because later on in the chat, we're going to use the chat for a special honor ceremony. But maybe it was a speaker, maybe it was the need for community. You know, why did you join us today, and where are you Zooming in from? And we're going to get a chance to interact with you throughout the session today, especially ideally at the end, when we might have the opportunity for you to ask some questions to our special guests. Now, also, I want to let you know that we're going to be muted unless we do have a time for a question or two at the end, so no need to fret about verbalizing anything. We're going to invite you to read along with us in various parts of the ceremony. But if you can keep your cameras on, it is so nice to see the faces out there in this space, so we can humanize this technological interface that we all find ourselves on across the globe. And finally, I want to let everyone know about the closed captioning. That's a very nice feature. If you click that button, the CC, you'll be able to see a transcript of the words being spoken throughout this session/ceremony. And finally, yeah, if you have questions for us, don't hesitate to ask in the chat. We have some incredible Reimagine staff here to support you in this experience today. Now I want to turn it over to Andy, who's going to be really one of the leaders of this experience. Andy is our program leader this evening and has invited the incredible speakers that are here, and he's also going to be the one hosting the conversation. It becomes really the featured segment of our time together. But Andy, I want to bring you in to share what kind of space this is that we're building, and then also what kind of space this is not.
Thanks, Brad. This is a collective space to grieve. It's a space that cultivates compassion for others and for ourselves. Most of us have arrived here with some kind of pain in our hearts. Our hope is to help people of all backgrounds and all abilities to face that pain, that loss, adversities, and mortality, and to create a more compassionate world. This is a space also for bravery. It takes courage to show up for others, especially for people that you don't know. And it takes courage to lament and grieve in public. There are so few spaces to acknowledge and share personal and collective grief. And with all that's going on in the world, now more than ever, people need access to gatherings where they can talk openly and freely about living and dying. They want to talk about illness. They also want to talk about joy. So thank you for co-creating this space with us. And finally, this space is imperfect. We might fumble, we might falter, we might offend, but we ask for your grace. What this space isn't. It's not about blaming. It's not about imposing religious beliefs on others. It's not about fixing things. It's not about providing solutions. And another thing I want to emphasize is that although this may not be a political space, it is a space to cultivate social justice. Our colleague Mazen Jamal has offered this definition of justice, quote, it's an environment of integrity and wholeness achieved through healing and transformation. When justice is present, we can trust that our safety and well-being are valued in the community or society. So that is our aspiration tonight.
Thank you so much, Andy. And so if this space feels right for you, then you are in the right place, and you can always use the rule of the one-click exit if this is not the space for you. But we're so grateful you're here and you've opted in to being part of this with us today, tonight, wherever you are in the world, whatever time zone you're in. Now, what are we doing here? Here's a quick agenda for our time together. So again, I'm Brad, and I am honored to play some music for you this evening, born out of my own experiences with loss. My colleague Dara Cosberg has built, once again, a beautiful altar, a flower altar that you're going to see that helps ground the space in something sacred and beautiful. And we're here to welcome you. But we're about to move into the ceremony. So as I mentioned, it's time for you to get your candles. We're going to be lighting those in a couple of seconds. Then we're going to move into a featured conversation with our incredible guests. We have another special guest leading our honor ceremony today, where you're going to be able to participate and share who and what you are here to honor or lament and process. And then finally, we're going to have a candle extinguishing blessing. And then we're going to close. And if there's time, maybe we'll hear from a couple of you. Maybe it'll just feel right to go on our way. We will see what happens as we get near the end of the session together. But know that no matter what, we hold each other with love here in this Reimagine community. All right, so I'm gonna guitar myself, and let us now move into this honor ceremony. Excuse me, this candle lighting. We're already ready for the honoring. So I'm going to invite my colleagues, Chris, Nicole, and Dara in 1 second, but why don't we begin by finding a candle, whatever candle we brought. If you have one, no worries if you don't. And we're going to just light those candles now. So now I invite Chris, Nicole, and Dara from Reimagine to recite this blessing on our behalf. And wherever you are, feel free to read aloud. We will feel your energy.
By lighting our candles, we mourn division, terrorism, murder, war, trauma, hatred, and all that is disconnected from love. We honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
By lighting our candles, we mourn division, terrorism, murder, war, trauma, hatred, and all that is disconnected from love. We honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
By lighting our candles, we mourn division, terrorism, murder, war, trauma, hatred, and all that is disconnected from love. We honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
So with that, I'm going to turn off the slides and we can look out. On the top right, there should be a button that you can see called Gallery View. And it's just so neat to look out at the sea of faces that are here together, co-creating the space, to take in the humanity that we can conjure on Zoom with these candles lit. If you have a candle, now is the time to maybe to hold it up to the screen. And if not, just the twinkle in your eye. And maybe find somebody else on the screen that you want to connect with for a second. Some face that draws you in, some candle whose light beckons you, and maybe for just 15 seconds only, why don't we fill our hearts with gratitude and care and hope for that person, and in our own minds create for ourselves some kind of mantra or blessing or phrase just to offer a bit of that kindness and that love and that care for that person as something that we wish might happen, not just for this person, but ultimately for all of the world. So let's find that person and we'll take 15 seconds of just silence to meditate on that person. Thank you, everybody. And it was a pleasure, Norma Jackson, to just spend some time wishing you such great care and to see your face. And it is crazy that even in, I'm guilty of it myself in my own day. That was the first 15 seconds I feel like I've really had to just slow down for a minute on this particular day and really sit with some kindness in my heart with that kind of intention. So thank you all for holding that as well. And now I'm honored to introduce our featured guest for this evening, Julian Randall. Julian is an acclaimed poet, an essayist, and young adult novelist. His debut nonfiction book is The Dead Don't Need Reminding, In Search of Fugitives, Mississippi, and Black TV Nerd Shit. It's a braided story of Julian's return from the cliff edge of a harrowing depression and his determination to retrace the hustle of a white passing grandfather to the Mississippi town from which he was driven amid threats of tar and feather. He's written 5 books across 3 genres. His book, Refuse, won 2017 Cave Canem Poetry Prize and was a finalist for a 2019 NAACP Image Award. For younger readers, he's the author of the Pilar Ramirez series and the forthcoming middle grade novel, The Chainbreakers. He is the recipient of a Pushcart Prize and the winner of the 2019 Betty Berzon Emerging Writer Award from the Publishing Triangle. His writing was anthologized in Black Boy Joy, which debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list. Julian's essays have appeared in the Atlantic, Vibe magazine, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. They hold an MFA in poetry from University of Mississippi. Julian, thank you so much for being part of this experience, for stepping in here and bringing your words, your experiences, your heart into this emergent sacred space. And I want to bring in my wonderful, incredible colleague, Andy Engel, who, as some of you who have been here before have seen, is a wonderful interviewer who's going to be with Julian in conversation. Andy, I turn it over to you to really help us ground this space together. And we'll sit back and just soak in the words that you create in dialogue together. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Julian, it was so great getting to know you on the page, and now I'm getting to know you IRL, so I'm thrilled. Welcome.
It's a joy to be here. Thank you so much for opening this space, for creating this space, the magnitude of what y'all do and who y'all are. Thank you so much.
Julian, we usually ask this question to our guests. Who are you honoring tonight at this vigil?
That's a wonderful question. I've been thinking about this all day, and as a children's author, always, it is important to me that every work that I do is honoring any child whose sky is governed by bombs. May your bravery continue to inspire action. May our action extinguish your fear. May your heaven stretch forever.
Amen, Ashe. So we have often explored at Reimagine how creativity can help us process grief. So we've done series and workshops on writing, on drawing. Last month at our vigil, our collaborator Sheila Collins led us in some movement and dancing as a way to process grief. But we haven't yet talked about how pop culture, AKA Black TV nerd shit, can be a resource to help us reflect on struggles, to help us process loss. And there are numerous pop culture references in The Dead Don't Need Reminding. And we could talk about a lot of them, but I first want to focus on the animated series BoJack Horseman. So before I read your book, I was already initiated with BoJack. I have a teenage daughter, and she really wanted me to watch some episodes with her. I have to admit, as a parent of a 17-year-old, there were many, many cringy moments watching this series with her. But I was amazed by it because it's so taboo breaking. It's so emotionally wrenching. And at the same time, it's hilarious. So, but for those who don't know about BoJack Horseman, could you describe it a bit to us?
Okay, so it's gonna sound like a joke because the show is a comedy, but what if Bob Saget was an incredibly depressed horse who had a really, really rough childhood, but also it was happening within the context of 20 years after Full House had come out, and people are kind of a little fed up with this continued pattern of behavior. So how do you, I think that there's never, okay, never is a strong word, but I have never seen an animated show that has been given so much breadth to think about the real weight of forgiveness and how that stretches in our lives and in our deaths and in between.
Death and grief certainly are recurring themes in this series. Relationships with family members are complicated. And I want to ask you now to read some excerpts from The Death Don't Need Reminding, and it's on BoJack, and it's about a funeral. So let's kick it off with the Old Sugarman Place.
Cool. All right. Interior, the Old Sugarman Place. On my way to my grandmother's funeral, me and my father drive through a place that should have been his. It is 2020 and the sun is yawning over us on our way down. We are going to Calvary Cemetery in St. Louis, where Dorothy Mae Leland Randall is scheduled to be buried. I hadn't known that my grandmother could die. After my grandfather passed, while my dad was a junior in college, she'd been the only parent he had left, and she'd never made it much of a secret that she didn't want him. For much of my life, it was as simple as that. Simple as watching her dazed and vicious berating of my father for hours over the phone about money she could have sworn he'd stolen, money that was sometimes still in her hand. I knew from the time that I was young, when she called, things got worse. I loved her, but at times that love was more an obligation, more a byproduct of feeling that I didn't have the right to keep a woman who couldn't remember to be unkind to me, only him. In the 4th season of BoJack Horseman, the incredibly depressed main character BoJack watches a group of fellow horses running shirtless beneath a relentless sun. He is fresh off a bender that ended in the overdose death of the girl who was playing his adoptive TV daughter on Horsin' Around, Sarah Lynn. He has hit one of the many rock bottoms he'll face over the course of the show, so he does what depressed people do. He ignores his friends' calls. He disappears even to himself. He runs without a destination. Finally, inspired by a childhood image of his mother, Beatrice Horseman, BoJack hightails it to Michigan as depressed niggas are wont to do in times of crisis. I've only ever seen one photo of my grandma as a baby, and even now, it sometimes feels surreal to consider that she was once a child. In the picture, her face is full of a joy that I want to say I only saw a few times in the 26 years we were both alive. But truthfully, I don't know that I ever did. Like BoJack, I followed a long trail to try and find proof that my grandmother was, somewhere in Mississippi, a child like any other child. In The Old Sugarman Place, BoJack struggles to try and fix up his family's old vacation home. He is huddled under a blanket watching TV on his phone because he can't figure out how to make his own house into somewhere he won't freeze to death. Once again, I am relating to some shit I shouldn't be able to relate to, but I relate anyway. The house remembers a child, Beatrice, whose mother went sick with grief after her all-American older brother, Crackerjack, was killed by Nazis in World War II. I think of my grandmother. I realize there might have been days, years, during which that baby, born at the beginning of an endless Mississippi summer, lived happily. That she must have taken her first steps unconcerned with whether or not she was a white man's daughter. That baby, my grandmother, formed her first memories somewhere. She formed her next memories in a place to which she was told she could never return, a place 2 hours by car from where I sat watching The Old Sugarman Place the day it premiered. In watching that episode, I am watching something like her memories, though they were scattered long before I knew to ask about this story. I'm ashamed. At some level, it took this long to consider that my great-grandfather's flight from Greenville was to have every childhood comfort ripped away from her in the way Beatrice Horseman watched everything she treasured about her girlhood crumble behind her. I never thought to ask as a child what happened to her between the baby picture and a soft lit photo of her draped in red at 20 years old, the prettiest girl in all East St. Louis. What had those years done to the daughter she was, the daughter I never grew to be? On the way to her funeral, I am listening to my father, who is pointing to a couple of storefronts on the side of the road. He is telling me that, before he died, my grandfather had purchased that stretch of road. He'd named it Skipperville, after my dad's childhood church nickname. My father is pointing, and I'm rewinding the clock in my head, prying the stores apart board by board until there is nothing left but pavement. I am doing this as my father tells me that it took months for him to learn that his mother, my grandmother, had sold it out from under him shortly after his dad died. And just like that, it's the present again. My grandmother is dead and everything is different now. Every story about grief is also a story about time.
Thank you, Julian. Talk about complicated family relationships.
Yeah, big time.
Is there anything that you want to say more about your grandmother, maybe since her passing, that you've reflected more about?
I think that it's something that shows up in such unexpected pockets. You know, I think that across the course of my life, there was this understanding that at some point or another, her death would kind of be this fork in. I think I had anticipated that her death would be a very particular kind of fork in the road moment for my father and our relationship, in a way that in some ways was supported by the funeral, and in other ways I think that I expected her death to haunt him more um, than it has thus far, or rather than he has felt comfortable to express that it has thus far. And so it begs this question, right, of how do we mourn people who loved us but also harmed us? How do we create memorial for that? I think that it's definitely been a strange year for feeling that grief, because she passed 4 years ago. And I think that I am certainly not alone in this chat in saying that deaths that took place while we were in quarantine, the timeline on how we feel that grief, the timeline on how we've felt the passage of time, I feel at least, since we went into quarantine, has been so fundamentally different that it feels sometimes as though the grief has an opportunity to be refreshed. Um, and so that's been an interesting thing to reckon with, especially as like this has been the year that the book came out, and so I'm sharing thoughts that I had never necessarily hidden about my and my grandmother's relationship, but that have so much more context and so much more richness for having lived and stood on the place that she took her first steps, probably. But these unverifiable, like ongoing and long-standing questions, and to now be able to share that with all of you, to be able to share that with whoever has had the kindness to read the book. It's interesting because she was a woman who very much treasured the fact that she belonged to herself. And that was what I had always gotten from our relationship, that she was somebody who had been asked to survive so much of the unsurvivable, that she deeply treasured knowing who she knew, being who she was, choosing what she chose, and to now be able to share part of her story with everyone, but not to be able to share it directly with her. To have so many of my members of my family tell me about how they felt about the book and not be able to share it with her this particular year has been strange. It's been strange making in the way that grief is strange making.
Thank you. Let's continue with the story of the funeral with Calvary Cemetery.
Sounds like a plan. Exterior, Calvary Cemetery. I arrive at my grandmother's grave, and there are no fewer than 12 Confederate soldiers there. Yes, you heard that shit correctly. Calvary Cemetery is a bit of a maze, a low skyline of Irish crosses and roses plucking themselves in the faintest breeze. My father looks up from a conversation we are having. We are coordinating the eulogies we'll be delivering, to point and ask if I'm seeing the same bullshit he's seeing. I confirm that what I see are 12 motherfucking Confederate soldiers, some with wiry gray beards, others cradling long muskets like children. A moment later, we realize they're not here for us, nor are they ghosts come to haul my grandmother's soul away. It might sound ridiculous, but part of being Black is that you're game for any haunting the nation can dream up. It turns out they're Confederate war reenactors, performing a faux 21-gun salute over their lost co-worker's grave. Because it's been years all of their faces polished down to nothing. Beyond the window of the car, it is both 2020 and 1868. Grief slurs years together, yet while she lived, my grandmother never forgot my name once. The guilt of that cements in my stomach as I look out at the silent muskets and the socially distanced Confederates. I forget what year it is for a moment. Every story about grief is also a story about time, and time's arrow neither stands still nor reverses. What a year it is exactly is a question that BoJack Horseman as a show gave a tremendous amount of weight to. It's a running question of a mostly solid, but at times cluttered, first season wherein BoJack meets Diane, Wynn, his ghostwriter, and falls in and out of love with her 4 or 5 times before the show settles into the fact they will be friends in the way disagreeable mirrors are often homies. From season 2 on, though, the show was a genre-bending epic, often moving between years and periods when it suited the show, putting aside that seeing 2007 get its real first treatment as a period piece and how ridiculously old that made me feel. BoJack was a show that understood that grief, depression, and anxiety are not born unto us immediately, that these are often matters of a hereditary sadness, a generational trauma that mashes all years together. The show's penultimate episodes routinely get into the kind of Hunter S. Thompson acidic flow that peaks with Time's Arrow. An episode that surrounds an elderly Beatrice Horseman with a small battalion of faceless maids in 1960s outfits as her aging mind struggles to separate history from the present. I was in my grandmother's life, the shortest of anyone she could still remember. She never was lucid enough to ask me, "What are you doing in Mississippi?" And I never was old enough to tell her I came looking for a long history of disappearing. When she was most biting towards my father, I resented that she remembered to be kind to me, but not the boy she raised, not the child she locked outside when racist children chased him home from school so that he would learn what she knew. The world is fight or sink and nothing else. I didn't know how to hold that fear, that one day her same fever could pull my father under, that the people I love most, myself included, could one day forget me but still walk the earth. What's a ghost in the face of that? What's 12 ghosts when you have generations to choose from?
Thank you, Julian. There are so many juicy, provocative quotes about grief in these two passages. From the first one you read, every story about grief is also a story about time. In this one, grief slurs years together. And my question to you is, are we traveling the multiverse when we're in grief?
I think so. I think in a lot of ways. I love that. I love that question, or I love that framing of it, because there are it's all of these kind of alternate endings that have one solitary answer in a way that they didn't used to, right? That there was always this possibility that maybe I was going to call her and it was going to be one of her lucid days and I could ask her this question that I had. And now those questions are answered by the wind, right? They're answered by the magnolias and the trees. And so in some ways, she's more present than she's ever been. Um, in a world where I interpret that to be her presence. But in the original kind of understanding that I had of reality as a small child, in the face of the enormity of everything she was feeling and moving through and how her impact had moved through my family, that feels like an entirely separate, in many ways, it feels like an entirely separate life. It is to grieve two separate women within the same body. And one thing that I've learned from being in love is that my grandmother was a Gemini. So she was committed to change and a multi-phasedness of her life that I don't know that her circumstances ever really allowed for. When you were a child born unbeknownst to you into a hustle, and then a child learning to walk while on the run. It is it invites so many questions of who and how she would have grown to be if she had been able to stay there her whole life. if she hadn't left under actual genuine threat, if they had not if they had not been summarily forced then to move to a town that had just suffered a massive race riot. If any of those things change, does she meet my grandfather? And do they end up falling in love? Do they end up having the child that was my father? Is there an heir to the Randall family? And if there's no heir to the Randall family, do I even exist? And so in many ways, the kind of central complication of this book has been that like there's a thing that she was impacted by in a way that I think that the grief was with her for so long that it just became a kind of spiritual practice that we didn't even necessarily know how to name or understand. And so it became perceived to be simply her nature. And there's all of these questions about who she wanted to be that I never could have asked. There's all these questions about who she could have been that are summarily extinguished by the fact that she was a Black woman in an era, like all eras, where America hates Black women. She never would have been encouraged to enjoy and appreciate the full breadth of what she wanted to be. And there are so many questions that grief now means that I have to ask the trees when I want to know what she would have said.
Thank you, Julian. We're going to continue on this vein of pop culture, superheroes, and myths. So the hero's journey, many of us know this concept of Joseph Campbell, this personal transformation. It's a blueprint for so many fairy tales, so many comic books, so many movies, and so much of our lives. And 2 years ago at Reimagine, we hosted a series on what's known as post-traumatic growth, this idea you can grow from your grief. It was a panel called Superhero's Journey, Truth, Justice, and the American Way. Okay. And it was a conversation about various protagonists in these iconic films and comic books. Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Storm, Black Panther, of course. And in order to overcome challenges, the hero or the superhero has to face anxiety, has to face depression, has to face fear, has to face loss, but he, she, or they don't have to do it alone. What I've learned from these superheroes and from that series is that it's essential to have a crew. It's essential to have a Justice League when times are tough. So my question to you is, who is part of your Justice League, both living and dead?
I would say that my great grandfather, I pull so much from the fact that he had every right to simply allow that event to run him over. It had run over so very many before, and would again since. So I pull a lot from the kind of, I feel like I've been meaning for the longest time to try and find some way to like write some more formal thoughts about this, but the idea of like the fugitive as like a kind of heroic figure within Black folklore, Black literature, like how you think about like, my brain always wants to say El Herrera because I read a lot of Watership Down as a kid, but what I mean is Brer Rabbit. But like how all of those things kind of come together. So I feel like within my alliance of ancestors who look out for me, I feel like he is always chief among the cohort. My abuelo also naturally standing in there, a fugitive in his own right from a grief in the Dominican Republic when Trujillo wanted him dead. Alongside that, I have so very many wonderful, close artist friends, and to be in conversation with them, to be in solidarity with them has always been just so crucial to me being alive, honestly. Nicholas Nichols, Etiola Jones, Noel Quinones, George Abraham, each of these people are doing such incredibly important work to heal our collective wounds and to build and imagine better and more expansive worlds. And so their imaginations are suns that I pull from all the time. I could not be Superman without it. So those are just the people who immediately spring to mind. Oh, and I also want to say Kiese Layman. Kiese Layman forever. So yeah, I think that would probably be, that's a pretty solid Justice League. We could fight, it might not be like 3 Earth invasions that we fight off, but we could get 2. We could get 2.
Let's talk about some dark times a bit. 2015, 2016. This was a time of heightened media exposure to lynchings, modern day lynchings. Something that's been going on since the beginning of slavery. And you write about experiencing these panic attacks in college. You've had some suicidal thoughts. And you talk about having nightmares of dying at the hands of the police. My question to you is, are those dreams as intense as they were almost a decade ago now? And what are you dreaming about now?
Thankfully, they are not. I feel very grateful for that. What do I dream about these days? My nephew. He is now, well, as he wasn't then, old enough that we can like have like real conversations and whatnot. So I dream sometimes about fighting alongside him in like cool sci-fi battles and whatnot. He brings me what I can genuinely say. He's one of the only people in the world who brings me genuinely an unimpeachable hope. When I look at him, I know that the world cannot end because he has so much more to do with it.
Thank you. I want to talk a bit about this theme that we've explored before at Reimagine, particularly with one of our collaborators. It's a group called MISO, and they're very interested in the topic of cultural bereavement. This idea, particularly among folks of immigrant backgrounds who experience various kinds of loss, ambiguous losses, and tangible losses. And there's this epistolatory essay in your memoir. It's a series of letters to another pop culture figure, Elena, who is a queer character in the One Day at a Time reboot that starred Rita Moreno, sadly canceled. And on your abuelita, you wrote, "All I felt was my Spanish withering in my mouth." Can you tell us more about your relationship with her?
Yeah, she was, it's funny that we were just talking about dreams. There's no way that she could have known this, but my connection with my abuelita precedes my birth, actually. She told my mother a couple days before I was born, that she dreamed that she met me around this age, I am told, and that we had a lovely conversation. And she said that I was a good person and that I deserved to be born, which was great because I was already on the way. But that was the very beginning, I guess, of this understanding of like, I remember asking my mother once if she remembers what language we spoke in the dream, and she said Spanish, of course. And I said, oh, okay, cool, cool, cool. And so there was this kind of understanding on my shoulders that the clock was ticking regarding like doing language and learning language. And my mother didn't speak a lot of Spanish to me as a kid because she wanted to make sure that, like, honestly, they were sold on that 90s propaganda that we had, that like kids who grow up in bilingual houses often end up with the worst of both worlds. And nowadays we see that completely inversed, is really just racism. But that informed so much, I think, of my relationship with Spanish, my relationship with language, that like there was this whole vast like cavalcade of stories that I wanted to be able to understand exactly as she said them. And I think that the first time that I ever got to experience grief for somebody that I was related to, because when one thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently is that when I was growing up, my childhood best friend's father was moving through terminal cancer, and we didn't know that well, I knew he was sick. We didn't understand what terminal meant. And so he was the first person I knew who I ever have memory of losing. But my abuelita was the first person I had ever anticipated losing who I lost. Um, and not really knowing what to do in that moment because it felt like I had been training for for an event that never came. And who's one of the things I loved about the way that y'all set standards in the space, in the breakdown earlier, is that this is not a space about blame, right? But for many years, I absolutely blamed myself that I was like, you weren't fast enough, you were too slow. Um, she could have been, we could have been even better friends. And she, like my grandmother, is somebody who I now must look to the breeze to speak with, and that's not a diminishment of our relationship, but it is another language to learn.
Thank you. I want to talk a bit about multiracial identity. We have a series called Table Talk, which is by and for underrepresented communities. And we had a guest named Crystal Chan who talked about this liminal status of being mixed race, the invisibility. Your quote on being Afro-Latinx is so powerful. On being Afro-Latino, quote, you are dangerous and shameful and difficult to imagine. Can you tell us more about the grief of that experience? And also tell me about the blessings of being Afro-Latinx, of being Afro-Latinx and queer.
Yeah, I think that it inspires that kind of the the bridge that anger can inspire within grief, if that makes any sense. There's this understanding that you come from enormous blessing. I always felt that way, that I had like my mom, who is a Dominicana with vitiligo. So while she's Afrodescendiente, she is not like my mother has never been racialized as a Black woman and never will be. My dad has only ever been racialized as a Black man because that is all he has ever been. And I had these two sides of my family that good Lord, what an abundance of music to pull from, Good Lord, what an abundance of celebration to learn and be party to. And there's like a like kind of grief that you feel that's like, it is so sad that you cannot see this the way that I see it. It is so sad that you cannot know to come into the conversation to honor the possibility of what I come from. And trying to figure out a way to translate that, and then the anger of feeling that you have to of being compelled to translate it all, right? And so I think that was really what I was trying to get at in that Spider-Verse essay about, like you were told that you are dangerous and difficult to imagine. How can I be both? If you fear me, then that means you must have imagined me. So it means that you can imagine me another way. Why choose not to?
I forgot to mention to you that I always feel the abundance of Dominican culture. I told you I'm from New York, but I live in Washington Heights. I think we have time for just maybe one more question. And I want to talk to you about genealogy as grief work. We haven't really, I want you to talk a bit about why you went to Mississippi. Maybe we can just start there, because I think people will be curious about that.
Cool. All right. So at the cliff's edge of that harrowing depression, at that exact moment in time, which I can only attribute as a gift from the ancestors, my father decided that he wanted to text me. And the thing that you need to understand about my dad's texts is that sometimes they are texts and sometimes they are miniature essays that he has been kind of just gestating in his mind. And there's no way to know which one it's going to be until it's already in the inbox. This particular time, my father decided that he wanted to tell me that he has final confirmation of what town in Mississippi my great grandfather came from, as far as he can tell, at least, because his birthday is mostly guesswork. But that means that he knows where my grandmother's father is from, which is cool because he only got to meet him like the one time, and he was a very small child when it happened, right? Uh, My great grandfather, Albert Edward Leland, was an incredibly light-skinned Black man from Water Valley, Mississippi. He married a woman named Jeanette Wheelis. They had my grandmother and her four siblings, sorry. They're four siblings. All of them were born in Greenville, Mississippi, which had just suffered the Great Flood, like the Great Flood in Mississippi history, which is like one of those like wild natural disasters that we just collectively do not talk about because it is something that happened in the South. That is pretty much the only reason that it's happening, right? So him being the manager of the National Life Insurance Company sees an opportunity. He goes down, sees an opportunity. He goes down there. They make him the man. They make him the manager. And like I said, incredibly light-skinned Black man. They're thinking because of quite literally his penmanship. They looked at his handwriting and said, "That is the handwriting of a white man, I tell you what." And so they let him keep that job for a good long amount of time before eventually what was always gonna happen happened. And they were just like, "Hold on now, that ain't no white man." And so the people of the town come into the hardware store that he sold the insurance out.
Julian, I can't hear you. Hold on one sec. Try again.
Yep. Hello,
It's a
hello.
little soft. I don't know what's going on.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
I'll lean forward. Is that helping?
Yes, there you go.
Cool. Let's lean it forward then. So yes, so the people of the town come in and say, "You have 24 hours. Pack up all of your things. If you don't, we will tar and feather you and everyone you love." And I was absolutely bewitched by this story, especially considering that, like, we're looking at this in the context of like all of these like televised lynchings, essentially. And here is finally the proof that this has been visited not only upon other people's families but also upon my family. Suddenly, the threat of lynching is survivable. How do we trace back to the first person that we can, the most recent person really that we can find in our lineage close to this time period who said, "I see this situation, I will survive this situation anyway," at a point in time when I wanted to survive nothing more. So I ended up down in Mississippi primarily because of wanting to do the genealogical work around that, right? That it was that I was in such a state of grief that I wanted to go find the root to see what I could feel afterwards.
Julian, can we hear you read this excerpt at the bottom of page 232?
Yes, let me find that page.
The very last paragraph, "I'm certain now."
Okay. Yeah, I love this. I love this paragraph. "I'm certain now that there is no way to prepare to stand on the ruins of where your grandmother took her first steps in this world. I'm certain because in my dreams I returned to 701 North Theobald, a barren field at the end of a maze of verdant cul-de-sacs. What remained at the address was a raised concrete platform. Crushed beer cans winked like shucked oysters. There was nothing to keep the air in my chest, only the understanding that the breath was still there as I sat briefly where there might have been a porch, where my grandmother and her four siblings might have grown to imagine whole worlds, to play baseball, to call each other some names in anger and other names in grace, if, before they built whatever has since been destroyed, she made a life here in the shadow of a lie that she didn't know was a lie until it collapsed around her and took the house with it."
Thank you, Julian.
Thank you.
I'm going to pass this back to Brad.
Wow. Andy, thank you so much for whatever you did to pull out those incredible responses from Julian. That was just so wonderful. And I guess I do have a question before we move on to the honor ceremony, Julian, for you. That's coming up for me as we're talking about ancestry and you know, your journey to get to the root. And I mean, it's a question also for honestly everybody in the audience today that it's coming up for me. It's almost like you know, my question really is, I know we want to be in the present, right? People say, oh, you be in the present, you know, but then it's like there's something that compels us to kind of look back. And then you also talked about looking forward. You talked about your nephew, who gives you so much, you know, hope in the future. I'm curious, I'm wondering, you know, maybe we could take a quick straw poll and then you answer this question. Do you think, for people out there, do you feel like as we age, are we more likely to think about our ancestors? Or is there a point at which, at a certain point, where, like, you know, our orientation changes from being more likely to then more future oriented? I don't know. I'm just curious for people out there, as you age, are you feeling more drawn to understanding your past or more drawn to the future? I'm curious to see some responses in the chat to that, but I'm wondering, Julian, you know, how you might respond to this, and what is it about our past that is so ripe?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you for asking it. I think for me, as I've grown older, I feel like I've become more ancestral. I've become more and more aggressively ancestrally minded. And I think that that's a matter of like, it's funny because I don't know if my way of perceiving it is strange, but this is the way that I perceive it. I often feel amongst when I think of the ancestors like a child at a party. Because you are among these huge kind of redwoods of people. And collectively you can hear their adult talk and smell the little bit of wine on the air. And they are very excited about the cheese plate. I obviously ferried around the ankles of various people at a lot of parties that had wine and cheese, apparently. But to me, there is just this collective sense of knowledge and grown-upness as you're moving through. But the taller you, like, you know, the taller and the older that I have become, the more I can separate their like individual distinct voices. Right. There's this way that I've known since I was a small child. When I see a cardinal, that's my grandfather. I have known that and been told that since I was a baby, that there was a cardinal that came to the windowsill the night before I was born, and that has always been a symbol of our family. Now, when I see magnolias, I feel like I can hear my grandmother. When I was in DR and I could hear the waves coming down on things, or hear people tell me stories about what my abuelo had meant to that neighborhood, those are the ways that now, as I am moving through it, I am part of and in conversation with a party that feels like it's happening around me all the time if I only take the time to stop and listen. But when you're a kid, you're spending so much time becoming your own ancestor, right? That you don't necessarily have time to listen to all the individual adult conversations that are happening above you, but they are always happening.
Yeah, that's so powerful, and I have to just read Norma. I mean, maybe it was just magic that you know, we connect, or I don't know, I connected with you at the beginning of the session, but just saying at 70, absolutely drawn to the past of my ancestors, but as a grandmother of 10, also drawn to the future. But I don't see them as disconnected, but one unbroken circle. And maybe you know, I guess that would be a perspective that I yearn to cultivate for myself. And I thank you for sharing that with us. Last question for you, Julian, and then we're going to move to the honor ceremony. In just one sentence, because you just talked about this beautiful description of ancestry and And then you also talked about grief as a compelling force to have you search back to something that was so beautifully spoken, and you've gained so much from that exploration. Just in one sentence, what is grief? You can do two if you need to.
Learning a new sense. Yeah, like learning, and it feels like learning a new sense. It's touch and there's taste and there's smell, and there's one additional sense that I have learned now that I can train all of my other senses to allow me to navigate.
Julian, thank you so much. I mean, well concluded with such beauty and so much profoundness. I don't know if that's a word you would know better than I, but thank you so much for really blessing us with your time, and invite you to stay with us through this honor ceremony, where we now invite Tony Pham to join us. Tony is a heritage Buddhist facilitator and healer. Tony goes by Butterfly in spiritual spaces. He is a second-generation Vietnamese American whose parents immigrated to the United States as war refugees. He orients his work in mindfulness using a social justice lens. Now, Butterfly has completed death doula training and facilitates various grief circles with Reimagine. We're so grateful for that. And most recently, led a pride circle last month with our other collaborator, Phoenix Song. Tony's death work was highlighted in the 2023 book, So Sorry for Your Loss. They frequently teach compassion meditation at Tibet House US. Tony is honored to serve on the National Board of Directors of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They live in Brooklyn on occupied, and I don't want to, maybe you can share, Tony, just you'll do a better job than me, on the land that is occupied on which you live, so I can do justice to that. But I just want to welcome you to the space, and you'll lead us in kicking off the honor ceremony and letting us know the land that we can all put in our hearts.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so New York, and particularly Brooklyn, where I'm located, is the unceded occupied land of the Carnasterie Munsee Lenape people. And just want to invite all of us to take a moment to breathe. There was so much rich dialogue. Thank you to Julian and Andy for that conversation. Some of the threads that jumped out at me is genealogy as grief work, and just feeling called to name that for many communities, and it's being mentioned here in the group chat, there may not be the opportunity to do genealogy in the academic sense. So I really appreciate and honor what Julian was saying regarding connecting to grandparents with the magnolias and with nature. And so there's a way that we can really just work with our bodies and work with environments around us as well. And I also saw in the group chat that people talked about losses that may have happened a year ago, whenever they may have taken place. In my experience doing this work, grief is not a ladder, it's a spiral, and anything can bring about a wave of grief. For myself, all of my grandparents have passed on, and reading a news article about how a 74-year-old Filipina immigrant named Corazon Dandan was pushed into a train in San Francisco just last week. That was very triggering for me because it reminded me of how our elderly, particularly those that are immigrants, are some of the most vulnerable. And so there's the individual grief for my family's loss, and there's this more global grief of just kind of like, what are we doing as a society? And I saw some of you have talked about in the group chat war and the environment and all of these things. And so just wanted to name that this is a honor circle, a space for people to grieve whatever it is that they are feeling brokenheartedness about. And there's a full spectrum of what that can be. And if you'll allow me, I'm going to now offer up just a brief few minutes meditation practice for us to center in ourselves and to connect as community. And then we'll transition from that into the entering of names in the group chat. And everything's optional, everything's in flow. So you're welcome to enter the names whenever you would like. But I'll ring the bell 3 times, and the invitation will be to close your eyes or just have them open with a soft downward gaze. Just inviting us to feel the ground beneath us, the land holding us, Mother Earth, feeling, in addition to the weight of your body being held and supported by the solidity, feeling the abundance, the generosity that is provided to us with nourishment. And knowing that that's always there, whether or not we're conscious of it, it's always there. And as you feel that inviting you to bring awareness and attention to the experience of breathing, noticing the speed or the depth of the breath without changing or judging or controlling, just witnessing. And if breath for any reason is inaccessible to you, you can work with sensation, like the touch of clothing against your body. Just breathing in, breathing out, sensing, feeling. Inviting you to rest your hands in your lap or at your sides, however's comfortable. Bringing attention to your belly, to your stomach, noticing the rise and the fall with each inhale and exhale, how it doesn't require your management. Allowing yourself to feel and trust that your body knows how to breathe and feel. Inviting you to bring awareness to the chest, the heart space, noticing how there's expansion and contraction, how one cannot exist without the other. Checking in and seeing what's there. Is there peace? Is there agitation? Is there joy? Is there sadness? It's all welcome here. And if it feels supportive to you, inviting you to begin to see what images naturally come up in your heart for what you're grieving, whether it's war, whether it's the loss of a loved one, the loss of friendship, of relationship. No one gets to tell you why you feel heartbreak. No one gets to say, oh, this is more sad than something else. This is a space for you to honor what you're grieving and to be supported in community. With that, I'll ring the bell 3 more times to close the meditation, and we'll just gently flow into a continuation of the honor circle. As you feel called, please enter words into the group chat. Please read what others are sharing and see if it touches you. And if you've already entered, there's no limit. You're more than welcome to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for such care and such deep reverence and all these names and phrases. No need to stop just because the music has died down. Doesn't mean that your words need to. Thank you so much to Tony for such a wonderful entry point into this part of the ceremony today. I found your words very liberating in terms of the permission that we need or don't need to feel how we feel. And I really appreciate it. Yeah, it was really, really powerful. And thank you to everybody. Maybe, Tony, just before we move on, maybe you could just offer us a couple breaths just to reground us in the space, because I feel like it warrants it after such a outpouring of love and care and remembrance and honor and emotion.
Yeah, pleasure. Want to just invite everyone to do whatever's comfortable for you, whether it's eyes closed or open, and I'll guide us through a couple breaths. I'll count to 3 to cue us in, but I'll provide some context for each breath. For this first one, I want us and invite us to feel the full range of emotions that come with the grieving process, and to, as when I count us in, we're going to breathe in and feel the rise, and then breathe out and feel the release of it, because the feeling, these feelings want to be felt. 1, 2, 3, breathing in with the emotions, breathing out and releasing them. Next, want to invite us to, when I count us in, just holding in our hearts everything that was shared, both spoken and written, and honoring with gratitude that we have this community that Reimagine has brought us together for. 1, 2, 3, breathing in with gratitude, breathing out with appreciation and tenderness. And to close, we'll start where we began. I'll count us in, and the invitation will be to breathe in the support and the stability of the earth, of the land, and to breathe out and remember that we're always held. 1, 2, 3. Breathing in, feeling that sense of stability, solidity, and breathing out and remembering that we can touch into that whenever we choose.
Thank you, Butterfly.
Thank you.
And now I want to pull back up the screen for a minute and invite to join me, Tony, to stay with me, and Julian. We're going to now collectively extinguish our candles. And before we do so, I want to let anyone know that if you want to keep your candle lit, again, it's your choice. Some people like to let it do its own thing. And if at the end of these 3 readings, we are going to collectively take a breath on the count of 3, 2, 1, and extinguish our flames. If you don't have a candle, feel free just to take another deep breath with us and breathe out the same emotional vibes that you're feeling, irrespective. So feel free to read along with us. By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive hope and the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow, and for the rest of our lives.
By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive hope and the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive hope and the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everyone. Now I'm going to bring back my dear colleague, Andy, and we're going to hear from another one of my colleagues, Chris, to help us close down this session this evening. Andy, if you want to share with us just a little bit about what's upcoming.
So this month, July, we've encouraged our community of collaborators to host events related to the loss of friends and friendship. Well, there's much attention to grief associated with romantic breakups, divorce. The ambiguous loss of friendships is less acknowledged, less affirmed. And how do we mend our broken hearts? So join us on July 17th. We've got Shelby Forsythia leading a workshop. We've got Butterfly and Boschko leading a grief circle, buy-in for the LGBTQIA+ community on losing friendships and more. And finally, on July 31st, we've got grief and trauma therapists Gina Moffa and Catherine Sled discussing the life cycles of friendships and the pain we experience when those relationships dissolve. You can register for those. We've got Room for Grief on July 18th with bereavement guide and death doula Michelle Thornhill. This is our monthly drop-in gathering for those experiencing all kinds of loss. And finally, our next vigil on August 7th, we've got actor, author, and family caregiver Steve Gutenberg. His new memoir is Time to Thank, and he'll describe his more recent and unexpected role as a caregiver for his father, who was diagnosed with kidney failure. Our other featured guest is Chris Dignan, who is a musician, composer, family caregiver, and Reimagine community collaborator.
And just to say, we are now, as you can see, offering tons of events and experiences for people out there, all to provide free and accessible and engaging spaces for people to be with what is. And we are also, the new announcement is we are working on a new platform to really rewire the negative effects of social media and kind of reharness some of that energy, but in a totally different way based on the science of post-traumatic growth and healing in ways that serve us, and we can go on growth journeys together and support one another. And so we're releasing this new platform, but we're in trial mode right now. And if you're interested in getting involved and trying this with us, if you want to put your email in the chat, we can follow up with you to be part of a trial for this upcoming work that we're doing that has been utilized so far by folks who have lost loved ones to COVID. And we're about to engage Stanford University's medical school in a trial of the platform, and many other folks who have lost loved ones and dealt with collective grief have been giving us some really helpful and great feedback, very much feeling transformation happening for themselves in ways that work for them. Okay, I was trying to get to this slide. I just wanted to, before, both of you have such ways with words, Julian and Butterfly, but I had to try to write a poem for you both based on the conversation that was happening this evening. These are called 15s, 5 lines, 3 syllables each. It always sometimes works. And this poem, based on what you said, is called Welcome to the Multiverse, in gratitude for both of you. So where are you? Who are you? Why are you? You brought us into we. So thank you so much, honestly, for connecting us to this collective sense of being here, sharing something together beyond just ourself. That's what I was really feeling this evening. And then also to the Reimagine staff and to, that's Dara, Andy, Nicole, and Chris. I want to introduce everyone to Chris, but just to say thank you. Every month, sad but glad, to mourn, grieve, grow in love together. And Chris is our development director, and he's been such an inspiration to me and to so many other people on the team and in our community through his own journey and his own work in helping power this movement that we're trying to build to democratize access to the kind of healing that kind of unique healing opportunities that we're providing like tonight. So Chris, I wanted you to maybe have a last word with us and just share anything you have in your heart after today's session.
I am super grateful and inspired by the conversation. And more importantly, just looking at the screens of all the different faces and just seeing how inclusive and diverse this space really is. I'm so proud to be part of an organization that is creating something that doesn't really exist. I came to this space after becoming a caregiver for my mom for the last 6 years of her life. And I wish that I've known some of the things that I know now. I wish I had more time. It's been 2 years now, and almost 2 years, and I'm slowly forgetting her voice. And so being a part of this group calms me, and it makes me still, and it makes me remember her and honor her in a way that sometimes when you're moving through life, you forget to. So that said, my goal is to get more people to join these cults, to get more people involved with this movement, with this wave of support. Thank you so much, Julian, for just all you shared with us today. The humor, showing the correlation between joy and pain, life and death. I love the superhero conversation because I feel equally some of the villains have stories too, and they also have trauma. And it comes to a point where you see two people that can experience trauma and one becomes the hero, one becomes a villain. And so what I appreciate about Reimagine is that there actually are tools and resources to help guide people through grief and to really use the trauma to grow. And that's kind of my focus here is to how can we expand the reach of this group, of this organization, and how can we deepen the impact? And so we need you. We need you. When my mom died, my father came to honor her, went back to his homeland in Augusta, Georgia, and found his wife dead. And at that point, I had nothing else to offer but this group. I said, Pops, you got to join this vigil. And I'm honored to see that today he's here. Hi, Patrick Thompson. That's you. That's my dad. That's a man that lost two important people in his life within weeks. And so while I wish I had more time with my mom, I know that she's looking down and she's happy. She's smiling. She's seeing how we are connected. My dad and I are connected. This community is connected. And there's so much love. But I also am amazed, again, if I saw any one of you on the street, the chances of us connecting would be very slim. And yet here we are in this safe space. And it's an honest space, and it's a courageous space. It's a bold space. I think Reimagine is redefining safe space. It isn't a place just to reflect and to remember, but it's a place, it's a source of inspiration and of joy. So, and of hope. So with that said, thank you so much for tonight. Please, if you're able to, we're asking for support, whether that's in a philanthropic contribution to the organization, whether it is spreading the word, because we want more people to join, whether it's testing the platform that we're launching. We need you. And we know because there's no blueprint that we need all of your brilliance, all of your resources as we navigate our own journey and ensuring that everyone has access to these resources. So with that, thank you so much.
Chris, thank you. Thanks everyone. Honestly, if there's something worth waiting for, it's listening to Chris. That was just very pierced my heart. And Mr. Thompson, thank you so much for whatever you did to raise such a inspiring, soulful, heart-centered man. And our heart is with you as well through your losses. And so thank you, Julian, again, and thank you to Rainbow and to Andy and to all the Reimagine staff and to all of you for being here. Julian, one last line from you before we take off. Any final reflection on this experience or anything you want to share with us as we wind down here?
What a gift to be amongst the impossibility of all of you. My heart is overwhelmed, and I am so grateful for all of your time and your attention. Each and every one of your ancestors is lucky to have you in their lineage. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that, the impossibility. And so let's keep making the impossible possible, because maybe this is impossible. I don't know what's happening right now, but it feels good to be with all of you. And as we like to end these sessions, and I do see, did you in the chat, was there a way for folks to follow up, Chris, with you, or how can people connect whether to contribute or to follow up with us? I see a link. I see. Thank you so much. I see Mary C spreading the word, some hearts. I saw it up above. Thank you. Sorry I missed that. Let's reimagine.org/support. And Chris, if you want to put your email, maybe people can reach out, because I saw Mary C react when Chris said, "Oh, I wouldn't be we wouldn't be friends if we passed each other on the street." And Mary C was like, "What?" Because I think now that she's met you, I just assume that you guys would indeed be friends. With that in mind, why don't we all end this session like we do some, where, once again, I had to sing happy birthday to somebody the other day on Zoom, and it sounded awful. It just sounded the worst. But yet we have found one antidote to the Zoom cacophonousness of horribleness, which is the word love seems to just translate so well through the ether. And so if we all just sing out on the count of 3, we can just repeat it, ad nauseum, just love, 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 love. Let's just litter love in our hearts as we walk off into wherever space we're going to be moving toward, and leave ourselves with that blessing. So on the count of 3, let's love it up and see how that sounds. The chorus of love. 3, 2, 1. Love, 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 love. It's just, you have to unmute yourself, so that's going to happen. It doesn't even seem to. Me and Chris, we're just going straight love at each other. Love, 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 love you, man.
Agape.
Wait, can people unmute or no? Is it just us going to have to just bring the love?
It's all good. It's all good. There's enough love there.
All right. Well,
love, 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 love.
Oh.
There it goes.
Love, love, love.
There it goes. Love, love, love,
There we
love.
go.
Love,
Love shines through.